Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Dixon, and today we've got Rena Pacheco-Theard on the podcast. She is the co-founder and CEO of Boutique, which is a short-term rental software company helping operators of short-term rentals with revenue management and building out a different pricing structure. So we dig into kind of her career and her history of how she kind of started Boutique with her husband, Dan, where they've been in the last 5 years as far as the company's growth. They've had a few pivots along the way. And we talk a lot about kind of her journey because she started a previous business and kind of what it takes from a mindset to be a startup entrepreneur. And so we talk a lot about her journey, and she provides a lot of context and good advice. So really awesome episode. So let's get Rena on the pod. Interested in hearing conversations with private equity leaders, CEOs of private equity-backed companies, and startup entrepreneurs where they share their stories about their career journeys, starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, and the important role that having the right talent plays in building a successful business, then you are in the right place. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. Here's your host, Justin Dixon. All right, Rena, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being on.
Yes, good to see you again, Justin.
Yeah, so I guess I know a little bit about you because I had you on a previous podcast that I had about real estate, but this one's a little bit more about kind of startups and founders and how they build businesses. And so, for the audience, the new audience here, maybe share a little bit about you and your background, and then we'll jump into some stuff.
Okay, perfect. I can share a little bit about Boutique. I know we'll dive more into that. So for myself, I'm a startup CEO and been working on our company Boutique for about 5 years. And I live outside of Seattle. I had been in Austin for a long period of time, grew up in Idaho, so I've been in different places. But my background is a combination of kind of nonprofit public sector work and getting a master's in public affairs, public policy, as well as the business side. So working at Deloitte in consulting, working at Indeed, getting an MBA. So I really like to combine those two different worlds into how I approach life in general, as well as building a business, which is very relevant to what we're doing at Boutique.
Awesome. Well, let's dig into Boutique. I guess, you started it 5 years ago, like you mentioned. And so maybe give us the current status and maybe anything that's kind of pivoted or changed throughout the years, because obviously sometimes startups start in one direction and then they go in a different direction at some point in their life cycle.
That's it. And I feel like if you are not growing, you're dying. Like you need to stay relevant. You can't rely on the way that you won in the market before. Like you always have to keep innovating. And I would say for Boutique, what we've done over the years is we always reevaluate and we think, okay, what is the highest value part of what we're doing? How do we do more of that? So how do we keep going? And so the core of what we do and why we started Boutique, none of that has changed in the sense that we see opportunity in the short-term rental market to have guests have a better travel experience, as well as hosts and the owners who actually own the property to do better so that this is an economically viable way to stay and that it works well for all parties. So we see opportunity in this market, and that hasn't changed from the very beginning. But how we approach it and the specific things that we're doing has definitely evolved. And so there's two components to what we're doing today. And the first component that you're probably most familiar with is Boutique operates a portfolio of real estate assets across the US and some internationally. And for that, it's geographically dispersed. These are great vacation rental properties that we have listed on the platforms. They're on our direct booking site. We help travelers. We do vendor management, home care, all of those things with kind of a remote, also distributed team. So we're operating that portfolio, but the way that that's shifted is that isn't our primary focus. So we've been doing that because we have a different perspective compared to other operators or tools in the short-term rental industry. I would say the first and foremost is when it comes to pricing. So we have had a different perspective from the very beginning. We don't use off-the-shelf pricing tools. From day one of Boutique for our own portfolio, we do our own pricing. That is not common. Like, you're not going to find operators who are like, yeah, we have a machine learning data scientist CTO and we do forward looking pricing for all of our homes. They're going to say, hey, I use X tool, or hey, I just use these kind of seasonality based averages for my rentals. So that's been very unique. And our pricing has evolved in such a way that we're now able to offer pricing support to other operators. So that's part of like the second thing that we do. So we operate our portfolio essentially as a laboratory for demonstrating what can be done with technology as well as operational experience. So we do pricing for our own portfolio, we do the listing optimization, and the new exciting thing that we're doing is supporting other great operators with their pricing and with optimizing their listings. So we've built an AI tool that basically identifies for a particular home and market what are the key elements to stand out in search. So what are travelers really interested in? What makes them want to click in on a listing for a particular market and home? And how do we optimize a listing description to have, as long as it's relevant, to have those elements? So how do we have the best and most informative listing that's most attractive to travelers? And then how do we combine that with pricing that really is going to have annual revenue as the North Star? So that's what we're doing for other operators, and they call it revenue management. And what's really unique for us is we aren't just a standalone pricing tool or a standalone listing optimization. We're doing both, because if you have better, well-written listings that are optimized, titles, descriptions, the settings, if you combine that with pricing, you get more views, more conversion, more revenue. And that is beautiful. And I'll say why that is so important. This industry has really evolved, that we've been, myself personally, I've been in the short-term rental industry as an operator, having our own rentals since 2014. It is very different today. And if you think about what happened during that COVID surge, people thought, hey, like, I saw a TikTok, you can get that cabin in Montana, like throw some IKEA furniture in, you barely have to visit it, and like you can make a killing. You cannot do that anymore. It is a far more competitive market. There's more supply. The CAGR is still 11% domestically, the compound annual growth rate domestically and globally for this industry. So it's growing, but it's stabilized growth rates. We're not looking at those pandemic surges. And so with more supply, kind of more historical growth rates, you need to do more to get more juice from the squeeze.
Got it. And I guess there's a lot to unpack there. So I appreciate the rundown on the kind of impetus behind boutique and then the evolution that has happened. And I guess going back to the portfolio that you manage, are these still all or are these boutique owned assets, or did you raise money and then go out and buy these to kind of create this kind of incubator that you called it, kind of this test pot of properties to kind of validate your pricing model?
Yeah, I would say to remain capital light as a company, we chose not to, I would say, distract ourselves or lose time by trying to fundraise to own the properties ourselves. Rather, we partner with third-party owners. So whether it's, a real estate firm, whether it's individuals, whether it's, any type of ownership group, we can work with them and operate on their behalf. And that really gave us speed to market. Right. So we were able to start with a single home. We've got about 90 million in real estate assets under management. And so that allowed us to more quickly go out into the market and use our tools to demonstrate above market returns.
And how is that? And I don't know enough about this, so I know a little bit about the short-term rental space. And I guess, how does boutique compare to some of the pricing tools that are out there that are kind of, like you mentioned, off the shelf from a capability, but also from a result? Because if I'm an operator and, I can work with you, and you're going to get me, 10%, 20% more per listing, the average nightly rate or whatever the metric is, how does that compare to the other off the shelf kind of tools? Like, people may know of AirDNA and some of those other kind of tools.
That's it. There's definitely different tools. And I think depending on your use case, there's going to be a tool that fits your needs. I would say what I found in talking with property managers, so the general manager of a property management company that has multiple listings, when they have one of those tools that you mentioned, it actually can stress them out because they log in. It's just another login, another dashboard, another set of data saying, hey, like this is what's happening in the market and these are the different things. And they still feel like the onus is on them to know what to do next. So they can kind of set it and forget it and let just the technology run away, but they don't feel confident that they're actually getting the most from every booked night, or that it's specific to their listing. And I think one of the problems is a lot of pricing is a market average, which if you are a market average home, that can be fine. That can actually be totally sufficient. But if you have more unique assets, or if these are assets in different parts of their life cycle, so it's a new listing and you actually need to optimize for occupancy to get a number of great reviews and really start that flywheel of, traction, bookings, great reviews, higher prices, that is very interesting. So I don't want market average pricing. I want listing specific custom pricing. And the second thing that I hear from the operators themselves is they would actually like a human to please be in the loop. They do not want to just trust the technology to do it entirely. They would like a human to actually review their booking parameters, their comfort level, important dates from their perspective on the calendar, and ask questions like, okay, if this is what's happening in the market, what is our response here? How do we get ahead of this? How do we use this to our advantage? Because I think it's very easy when you're a general manager, you've got guest communications, you've got owner relations, you have vendor management, you have home care, you have all of these different things where reviewing your pricing and optimizing that, or even coming back to look at the listing descriptions that you set up when you launched a home, it is not your priority. Not because you don't think it's important, but you don't have time. You don't have time to do all of those things. It's a different skill set. And you kind of live in the urgent moment of, oh my goodness, this is literally on fire. Like I have to deal with like a literal fire at a property. I have to deal with this urgent guest issue. A vendor is telling me, this septic needs to be replaced. Whatever it is, they're living in that urgent moment, and they aren't able to put time and resources towards optimizing in these different ways. And so that's where our value proposition is. We know what's on your plate because, hey, we are operators as well. Right. It's one of the things that we do. So we understand the pressures that you're under, but we have a team of experts, and we've been able to use technology as well as expert human in the loop guidance to be able to customize a strategy so that they don't have another dashboard to log into. They can actually let us do it and tell them what is happening and answer questions. So I think that there's almost like, I used to work in consulting at Deloitte. There's almost a consulting element of, hey, you have this team that's kind of at your fingertips, and it isn't just a technology play, which I think is very compelling.
Yeah, it's almost like the easy button, to really simplify it, right? Like if you're an operator, and one of the reasons why I never jumped into the short-term rental acquisition and operation space is because, one, I'm scared about regulation, right? And so you've got to be up to date on regulations because they can change, very locally, hyper locally, or statewide, obviously. But also, it seems like a lot of work, especially nowadays, right? Like if you started back in 2014 where you could, get these hockey stick growth, it's different, but you have to have a little bit of scale to make money, right? And and so I guess, is your value proposition from an easy button perspective? And again, I don't mean to simplify the tool to a button, but essentially if you're an operator and you're managing your own properties, you maybe use some bots or some VAs to support. Is it more economical to work with a firm or a product like yourselves, where obviously there's going to be some type of cost structure, whether it's a subscription basis or some type of revenue share, or I don't know how you structure that, versus, but also you're going to get potentially a higher average daily rate, so that could offset the 100%. Potentially more cost than maybe trying to do it yourself.
Yep. And I think, again, our perspective, because we are operators, I know that someone cannot sign a contract and cannot continue working with someone if they don't earn more, if they don't get more of a benefit from the engagement than it costs to participate in, right? And so we're really attuned to that. So for us, we structure it as a per listing monthly fee. And what we're seeing in the market is a lot of these property managers, their alternative is actually having a full-time staff member dedicated to revenue management. And we've seen listings for jobs for revenue managers trying to pay, $60,000 a year for a data science expert. They're not going to find them at that price point. They're certainly not going to understand the industry to be able to get the kind of results and to have the technology that's going to increase revenue in a way that justifies that salary. So our value prop is you're going to pay less for better results. You don't have to hire an FTE. This is a way, keep your current team as is, focus on those areas where you're going to be highest value, and use someone in this discrete manner to optimize these elements without having to add an FTE.
Got it. And then I remember when I first met you and Dan, a number of years ago, and boutique. You guys were obviously working on boutique. You also were managing property, so you had teams of people and relationships with vendors. Is that still an offering you support, or have you kind of
it certainly
simplified
is. So
it?
it's part of that laboratory portfolio. But I would say our goal isn't like, hey, we want to be the largest operator, because we want it to be a manageable number and for us to be able to drive really great results, but it isn't our key focus area for growth. So for growth, our client, that's property managers, not owners of homes looking for that. So it's certainly something that we still do, but from a growth perspective and where we're putting that focus, we're really focused on supporting other operators as the primary function for boutique.
Yeah, and that's obviously more scalable to be more on the software and somewhat services side versus the human capital intensive property management
exactly right.
Cleaners and all that fun stuff. So that makes sense from a scale perspective, I would say. So you've been at this, this is not your first startup, right? You started a company, I guess,
Prepify, yes.
Prepify, a few years ago. I guess, how did you, so I'm always curious about people that start businesses. I think it's very fascinating, especially, tech businesses and in those types of worlds. So how did Prepify come about? And then, what happened? And then how did, you be like, hey, I want to jump back in and start boutique?
Yeah, so I feel like there has to be a little bit of cognitive dissonance about like the pain involved in like a startup where you're just like, it wasn't that bad, like it'll be great this time. So you have to be a little bit willing to like be optimistic, even though the reality is, right, we have statistics on how likely startups are to succeed or fail, and headline, most startups fail, right? So you have to be very aware of what that operating environment is. But I would say for both Prepify and then with boutique, the key was personally identifying a problem, developing a solution. And then the difference is with Prepify, I wanted people to believe in my solution. So it was helping talented but underserved high schoolers go to great colleges. So helping them with test prep and mentorship, and essentially being lead generation to the top colleges who want these very talented students who aren't coming from the normal places, right? So to help them get eyes on this really coveted talent pool. So I believe in it, and I still believe in that premise, because I may have told you before, I think the two keys to economic mobility are education and real estate. So I really do feel quite passionate about that, and education has been hugely important in my own personal life. However, I was trying to convince the market that Prepify should exist. So I was kind of like that salmon, like swimming upstream. And that was very challenging, right? And I think the difference with boutique is saw a problem, developed a solution. The market demanded the solution. I was just doing it. We were just doing it. My husband, Dan, is our COO. We were just doing it personally. and the market was like, ooh, I really like what you're doing over there. Like, could you do that for me? And so I think that is the big difference. And I think why boutique has been as successful as it has is the market responded. And so we have been, like I said, we continue to evolve. You've got to, but we find the highest value part of what we're doing, but it needs to actually have uptake from the market, not just us trying to convince the market that something should exist. But I think that entrepreneurship at its core, the idea of building something and being able to put in effort and see the result, it doesn't mean that everything you try to build, you get to, or every time you try to fundraise, you get to have all those resources. It is by no means easy, but you earn every inch. And I feel like that is personally very satisfying, even if it is challenging. The idea of being able to see your impact and build something in this world is deeply satisfying.
How is it working with your husband, Dan?
Yeah, it's actually really good. And what's funny is I don't even have to like think about it. We have different skill sets, and we do sometimes disagree on things with the business, but like 9 times out of 10, we agree. And when there's different ideas and we both latch on to something, if both of us with our different perspectives, the different ways that we operate, if we both see value in some partnership, opportunity, revenue model, whatever it is, individual that we're trying to hire, if we both see opportunity, it's like, this is good. This is really good. And so I have a lot of respect for him. And I actually love that. It used to be when I went to work, and I'll think about my last job prior to boutique was working at Indeed. I did some cool stuff, and I would try to explain it to him, and I'd be gone, many, many hours of the day, and he would be working somewhere else many, many hours, sometimes, not even in the same state. And, we'd come back together and we sort of talked about what we did, but I didn't really know what he did, and he didn't really know what I did. And I would say from that partnership perspective, the fact that we fully see each other and the strengths, how challenging things are, but how satisfying they can be, and that we can actually fully see that part of the other person's life is kind of cool. Like it's a good deal. I don't think it's for everyone. And like people have told me that they could never do that, but other people make it work as well. And so I actually like don't ever see myself not wanting that. Like I would want that no matter what I was working on. If Dan and I can work together, sign me up.
Yeah. And, we're in this kind of, post-COVID, hybrid remote. There's a lot of companies now starting to go back to office and things like that. How do you, working with your husband, Dan, like, all day, every day, how do you separate home, family, travel, kind of separating the business and having a business conversation and then sitting down to dinner and talking about stuff, and maybe how do you
blurry.
Interact
It's totally blurry. And so there isn't this like fine line of demarcation. It's like, this is work time and this but I would say we generally keep it to the work hours as much as we can. But if something comes in and it's after hours, like we know it's important. And like in a startup, you cannot like rest on your laurels. You have to respond, like whether it's good or it's bad, you've got to do something. And so that does sometimes creep in. But I would say I actually like that there's a blend. And as part of that, like I'm in our office, he's working in another room. We generally don't work in the same room unless we're on a call together. And so it'll be funny. So some team members will be like, oh, like Dan must be there. Or Dan's hearing this. And I'm like, no, like he's not. Like he's somewhere else. Like I don't know where he is. He's somewhere else in the house, because I actually think we both kind of want to just do our thing to a certain extent. But what I really like is we have 2 young kids, and yes, they go to preschool. So they're gone for, part of the day, but then we have an au pair who helps us here at the home. And if we want to have lunch with the kids, if we want to take them somewhere, if we want to, just sit with them for a little bit, they are around. And they see us working and they ask questions about it. And I'm actually really proud that we are building something together and they can see how hard we work. And I hope they, obviously they're very young, but I like that I get to have some family time and visibility, and as opposed to being away at an office all the time. And like different people have different priorities. And then I would say, different stressors on them in terms of what they're even able to do. But I feel fortunate that I can have a satisfying, sure, stressful, but satisfying professional life and still be physically present for my kids. That's pretty cool. And I think it's cool for them to see that we work as hard as we do.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, as boutique grows and as the kids grow, they will, be aware more and more of what mommy and daddy are doing to,
Yes.
provide for them and go take these awesome trips or whatever the case is, because obviously,
Mhm.
one kind of leads into the other, right? And
That's right.
so, um, I guess to not a little bit of a hard pivot, but AI is integrated into everything, right? And
Yeah.
so what are you seeing in the short-term rental space in general? What are you seeing in kind of the real estate tech, if I can lump you into that kind of bucket? Like, how are you seeing it integrated? And are you leveraging it within the platform, within your tools? Like, how are you kind of
Yes.
thinking about
So,
AI?
yeah, I think that you have to, whether you use it or not, you need to understand it. And I would say you're going to benefit more if you're using it as well. I think that some of the easy wins with AI have been people using the chatbot to respond to guest inquiries. And that can be fine. I also think it can be disingenuous. So I think we have to be careful.
Yeah.
I don't think that everyone wants to think that they're having an authentic conversation with a human just to be just to learn or to not even know and to kind of have their intelligence disrespected in that way. So I actually have some feelings on that, but I think that that can be a good option for perhaps after hours support or triage, right? To get to the right human who can give you a fuller response, right? I think that can actually be useful. I think there's also ways that have become a little bit more common is using AI tools to basically just update listings like, hey, we installed carbon monoxide alarms, which they should have already had, but they decided to install them. Make sure, use your little AI chatbot and use your little assistant to just go and update all the listings, right? And those are little things that I think those help around the margins, right? It can save a little time. But I think what we see as the most valuable application of AI and technology is pricing and is listing
Mm,
optimization, right? And so we're using that because pricing, it has to be dynamic and it has to be so responsive to the precise market conditions at any point in time, market conditions, the listing itself, and that opportunity. It's for the guests so that they're able to see the right inventory, and well as this is a economically viable industry. So it's really important for travelers and for owners that pricing is really optimized. It's super important. Otherwise, this industry doesn't exist, right?
yeah.
So I think that's really important. And then when it comes to listing optimization, it's interesting because I do travel, and we went personally on kind of a ski trip for New Year's, and we were evaluating listings, right? And so I'm thinking about the way that I evaluate listings and the way that things are described or not described, the way that photos give you information or don't give you full information, or give you confidence or don't. And so you see it when you are doing it. And the reality is some of those things can be quantified. Some of those things can be identified about what is compelling to a traveler. What does a listing need to stand out, to show up top of search? And so we use technology, but it's reinforced by the things you do with your own brain and your own decision and analysis about where do you want to put your group. So I think it's really interesting. And I want to be at the kind of leading cutting edge of all of that. I don't want to be someone who just uses the tools that other people created. We want to be creating the tools, and we want to keep thinking about where could technology better be applied in some scenario, right? What are the next things on our product roadmap? And that's something where, as a startup, right, you have to make tough decisions about where are you going to invest, because you can't do all the things all at once. You have to really kind of like ruthlessly prioritize. And so we have a pretty robust product roadmap. There are a lot of other things that I'd like to do, but it's really finding what are those highest value applications and putting the resources there and then thinking about like, what can a human do that makes sense? Where is a human useful, additive, a good review layer, etc.? Because I don't think that a push to move everything towards just pure tech, I don't think that's the right play for travelers or for the owners of the real estate.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are just throwing AI at everything, and
Yeah,
it can be helpful, but it also can create a lot of junk.
that's just
Everybody,
it.
yeah,
It's kind of like,
everybody's getting all those like LinkedIn messages and emails that are just, you can tell they're just, created 100% by AI. And I use
that's
AI to
it.
create messages, but I
Mhm,
also, I use like an 80-20 rule, right? I think
mhm.
I can leverage it in a way that it writes a better email than I could write personally, but then I take what it gives me and then I edit it to be more in my language, and it'll get
That's right.
better and better and better. But I'm not copy pasting what create me a 3 email drip campaign, boom, copy paste, go. Then
Mhm.
that's what unfortunately a lot of people are doing, and
That's it.
it
You see it. And it's like, I've
yeah,
gotten those emails and I've even gotten them from other founders where I'm like, I know you. I know that you didn't write this message and we actually have a relationship and like, you should know that. And so
right,
I don't think that like junk interacting with junk is like a benefit, right? It's just a lot of noise. And it's kind of that difference between activity and motion that we may have talked about before. Like, okay, you can do flashy things, but are you getting better results? Is this driving anything differentiated in a positive manner? Or are we just like spinning our wheels or thinking that we have to use something because everybody's talking about it?
yeah,
So I think that right now we're definitely still in, I would say, a noisy period. But I think it's like that you see more of that separation of what is high value. Those things will sustain. I think that, like, lots of AI generated content being read by other AI, like, oh, okay, like
right.
that doesn't benefit anybody. But let's think about where technology can be additive and try to double down there.
Yeah, no, I like it. As we kind of round this out, I want to kind of just get your sense on, the overall startup landscape.
Mm,
We're recording this in January of 2025. And so, I work a lot with private equity firms and PE backed companies. And, I'm hearing a lot of 2025 should be a good year for acquisitions, for transactions,
mhm,
M&A
mhm.
activity. Where do you see boutique going in the next 12 months if we were gotten jumped on a podcast in January of 26? And then, maybe broader market, from a startup perspective, where do you think where do you think things are moving?
Yeah. So we've seen a lot of different cycles in those 5 years because we had COVID, we had the collapse of SVB, we've had inflationary environment, we've had interest rate, we've had all sorts of things happening, right? And I think that part of that has been like a general funding slowdown or lower
Hmm.
valuations, fewer transactions when it comes to the startup world. And I think we are going to start seeing more activity. And I don't think that we should necessarily return to those super high valuations that weren't actually backed by any roadmap to profitability, and like any revenue is just kind of like vanity or user metrics and thinking that that could create value. So I think that there's kind of like an equilibrium. And I hope that 2025 is going to be for companies that have put in the legwork to build something unique and differentiated. I think there will be more transactions, whether that's funding or acquisition. I think that if you have been able to persevere despite the headwinds of the past couple years, I think there's something very interesting that whether it's investors or other companies that are thinking, okay, how do I differentiate myself? Where can I find value that's been created? That's where I do believe there's going to be more activity. I don't think it's going to be
Like
outsized.
2021.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be outsized, and I don't think that that would be healthy, right?
Right.
So I think it's kind of like a more gradual move to say, like, okay, it's been a little quiet. Let's see some of these things come to fruition.
Yeah, no, I like it. And if there's somebody listening to this that maybe they're thinking about doing a startup, right? They have this idea, and maybe it's they haven't taken it past the idea phase. Maybe they jotted down a few notes. What advice would you kind of give somebody that's sitting here listening and being like, I want to, be where Rena is, and build a startup and solve a problem and all that. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of noise, I would say, around like how cool startups are, and like it's like a little sexy, like working on a startup, or like put on your LinkedIn like stealth startup. Like, yeah, it's kind of cool. It's like, okay, what's somebody building? But I would say I do want people to have their eyes open to just how hard it is, because in this world, the default is that you don't exist. Like, your company doesn't exist. All general forces are headwinds. They are not tailwinds. They are not pushing you to be in existence and to be successful. It's actually, you have to fight against market forces that aren't personal. It's not personal at all. Market forces that basically say, we want incumbents, and we want those who already are successful to continue to be successful, right? That's what general kind of like inertia, right? So I think you have to know that it is uphill, but it doesn't mean that it cannot be done. It just means that you have to be very flexible. And I do get excited when people have an idea that they actually decide to kind of give the oxygen to breathe, meaning they actually take a chance on it. Because I think it's easy to be like, I've got these cool ideas, but I'm just going to like have my 9 to 5 and like think about it. And like, when it's so compelling, then I'll quit my job. And you don't necessarily need to quit your job, but like, how can you measure traction or demand in like that like purest MVP way? Like, is it a website where you collect emails? Is it a newsletter? Like, what are the ways that are very lo-fi, do not require you to be incorporated or to have raised money? What are the ways that you can actually test market interest? Because, hey, if there's market demand, let's build something. And so I think it's really exciting. And I am encouraged when people take that leap, but I don't want people to think it is this cakewalk, because it is not, but it can be very satisfying.
Yeah, everybody sees the overnight success. They see the before and the ring the bell on the NASDAQ,
That's it,
and they don't see the 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears that go into it. Yeah,
that's right.
Makes sense. Well, Rena, we're gonna end this with a 3-pack of questions that I ask every guest, and these are a little bit more about you. So, what's an influential book that you've read in recently that you would recommend the listeners to read?
Oh, that's an interesting question, because to be honest, I do not have a lot of spare time. So a lot of my, like, anything that I'm reading is like an article or me reading like books to the kids before bed. So I would say I haven't actually been doing as much reading, which I hope to kind of change as things go forward. But I would say, for me, I actually found that it wasn't reading, but just podcasts. If I happen to be driving, and my parents live like an hour and a half away, so it's like, if I'm driving, for me, it's less me reading, because I truly don't have a lot of spare time because of kids and business. But I think things that make you think and have a different perspective. So maybe it's too many people say this, but Malcolm Gladwell, I think, he's an interesting individual, but I think he talks about interesting things, whether you agree with them or not. And so some of his podcasts I've found to be very thought-provoking. And it's also, I think, helpful to have information that isn't specific to your industry or, to entrepreneurship or anything that's as related to you. It's more about life and different elements. I think that can be a really good way to spend a little bit of free time.
Yeah, no, I like it. What's your favorite thing to do outside of work? Those few hours.
Well, so obviously I love my kids. So kids are the number one. But my fun thing that I'm doing is I am going to be running my first full marathon. So I used to run cross country. I've run multiple half marathons, but I've never done a full. And it was literally, so I'm signed up in April. I'll do the Eugene, Oregon marathon, Tracktown, USA. And I literally had a dream about running the marathon last night. So it's like, it's in my blood. I'm like eating, breathing.
You're ready to go.
It's like, I still have so many demands on my time. I like eke out my workouts when I can. And it's usually on a treadmill. So I have my phone and I can still make calls and be responsive because I kind of have to in this world, but I'm loving it. I got back into running a little less than a year ago after the kids and all that. And I really love it.
Awesome. Very cool. Last question here. What is your favorite vacation spot when you can take vacations?
Yes. So it is Oregon coast. I grew up in Idaho, and we would go on occasion as a family. We never like flew anywhere. We were always driving. We would drive to the Oregon coast, and there was something so magical about it. And as a family, we got to go there just last year, 2024. We took a trip during the summer to the Oregon coast, and I was just in love. So it is the breeze, the people, the shops, the everything. It's just really peaceful and lovely. And I think it's so cool that I can drive there now.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, that's a little far away from Austin, but now that you live in Seattle, it's pretty convenient, I would imagine.
Exactly.
Very cool. Well, Rena, this has been awesome. If people want to, reach out, maybe they have this idea and they want to, get some inspiration from you, or if they want to follow along with what you're doing at Boutique, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, so there's like contact information on the boutique.co website, but also just find me on LinkedIn. Unlike other people, I'm actually responsive. If people send a real message, I will respond. If there's like a real message and a request, then I'm actually pretty likely to respond. If somebody just adds a connection with no context and then doesn't follow up, nothing's happening there. But if there's a real question, I know that I really appreciate it when people have helped me or been responsive and like, I would say respectful even, because I feel like there's a respect involved with acknowledging that somebody's reaching out. And even if you're not able to help them, like acknowledging that. So I want to be what has been most helpful for me.
Awesome. Yeah. Pay it forward. No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Rena, it's been great to catch up. Thank you for being on my latest podcast here. So thank you very much.
Yes. Oh, my pleasure. Great to talk.
I hope you found at least one actionable insight from this episode of the Growth Capital Podcast, your one-stop shop for insights from private equity leaders, CEOs, and startup entrepreneurs on starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, as well as the role having the right talent plays in growing a successful business. It would be greatly appreciated if you would rate and review this podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and drop us a comment so we can expand the audience of this podcast. Thank you for all your support, and don't forget about upcoming episodes dropping every Tuesday.